History, as they say, is doomed to repeat itself if we don't learn the lessons of the past. And it is with a heavy heart that I report that Rings of Power has once again done goofed. It has committed a cardinal sin of fantasy world storytelling. It has followed in the unfortunate footsteps of Game of Thrones in its later years. Spoiler for the brand new episode of Rings of Power, that being episode 6. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to be talking about at least one part of it in this episode. And that is Galadriel's arrival to save Arondir and co. from the Orc attack in the Southlands. And they do it at a speed that just seems incomprehensible. It is incredibly difficult to reconcile the arrival time of Galadriel in the Southlands with when she set off from Numenor. And as we know, Game of Thrones did the same thing. Game of Thrones did the same thing in the later seasons. It was one of the horsemen of the apocalypse that spelled the downfall of the quality of Game of Thrones as a series, the disregard of established distances in lore. And Rings of Power have done it here, and I just don't understand it. It was a known issue. They've pulled the Iron Fleet shuffle on us. But more specifically, what am I talking about? Well, fortunately, we have an article from Forbes. I do like some of the stuff that Forbes puts out, actually. I think Forbes, is usually a little bit braver in letting contributors say whatever they want, and I do appreciate some of what they do. The Rings of Power is abusing fast travel even worse than Game of Thrones, and this even is worse than Game of Thrones. It even is worse than Game of Thrones. And they start with a quote that I really like from Tolkien. So these are Tolkien's own words. I wisely started with a map and made the story fit, generally with meticulous care for distances. And one of the biggest impressions that Tolkien leaves when he writes the story is the attention to detail when it comes to people traveling distances. The journeys that both Bilbo and Frodo go on in Middle-earth last ages, and he makes a point in every chapter of telling you how many days things take and times when people stop for food and when characters get tired and all of the conditions, the weather conditions that they're walking in. He seems to have thought it was really important in building this grand scale of adventure. And I'm sure lots of other readers get that as well. You don't get it quite to the same extent in Peter Jackson's movies. I don't think that's Peter Jackson's fault. It's just something, it's just a lot of exposition that Tolkien puts into his work when he's writing The Lord of the Rings. And you can tell he's an avid walker. He loves walking. He spends a lot of time hiking, talks about wet feet and needing to stop for meals and considering where you're going to sleep, where a character's going to sleep for the night, something that he really cares about. And yeah, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power in episode 6 have pulled a bit of a fast one. As this writer goes on to explain, spoilers obviously, I've already made that clear. In episode 6 of The Rings of Power, Galadriel casts a magic spell, Teleportation. She transports the Númenórean army around 2,000 miles in a day or two. Either that or everything in these timelines is occurring at a wildly different speeds. Either way, it's confusing and makes the Rings of Power feel cheap, rushed, and all over the map. Literally. Spot on. As soon as it happened, there was a point when I was watching this episode 6 where I just thought, there's no way. No way are they intending for Galadriel and the Númenóreans to arrive here in time to help their Southlands. I just thought that would be outlandish. But they did. And to emphasize the point, I've actually got two maps. I've got Tolkien's original annotated map. And the journey, I just want to point out that the journey from here, Rivendell, down to Moria and then through Moria in the Dimrill Dale took over 2 weeks. This rather small L shape took over 2 weeks of travel, and he makes the point very clear. Characters stop for meals. Characters stop and take turns at watch. He just had a deep appreciation for distances. And in quite a funny twist of fate, Amazon have put a different map, a sort of redone map of Middle-earth and how it would have looked in the Second Age, which is where this story takes place. So I mean, if we take a look at this. This is the map. We have Mordor here. I mean, it's not named Mordor yet. And we got Numenor. So in the space of this episode, Galadriel covers this distance in the sea, which is pretty big. But even if you completely disregard the distance in the sea, they land on these shores here. The episode doesn't spell out in any great detail where they land, even though I'm fairly certain that's something Tolkien would have wanted to write. But all right, let's just say they did an amphibious landing. Bearing in mind they've got almost 500 men, amphibious landing of men and horses somewhere in this region. They then have this trip from the coast all the way up the sides of Mordor, and this brings me to another point that I want to address. Not only did Tolkien have a huge appreciation for distances, Tolkien also had a great appreciation for like mountains as a geographical feature in the story of Lord of the Rings. They're not easy to cross. There are like very specific crossing points that you need to go to. And returning to the other map that I was just bringing up, you've got the Gap of Rohan down here. I mean, this is like a key geopolitical area of strategic importance because it's one of the few ways of getting over this mountain range. This mountain range is a real challenge. The whole Fellowship of the Ring, the whole first part of the trilogy, once they get to Rivendell, is based on the idea like, how are we going to get over this mountain range? And so, they originally try Caradoras. They try getting over it. They can't. And then they have to go through Moria. Gandalf makes the decision, despite Aragorn's protests, to take them under the mountains through Moria. But the point is that this whole decision of how we're going to get over these mountains is a key decision. It's a pivotal decision to the story. And Mordor's the same. Just zooming in and bringing up... And bringing up Mordor, this whole mountain range here, I know it looks a little bit pixelated, I'll try and zoom out a little bit. This whole mountain range down the left-hand side is impassable. So Galadriel and co land here to the west in the South Gondor region. How are they going to get in? Again, in the Return of the King, it's a point of critical plot importance. Mordor is a super, super difficult area of land to get into. The mountain range is nigh on impassable. I mean, they've got 500 troops with cavalry. I doubt they're taking the same super hidden stairway that Frodo and Sam did when they climbed up and went through Shelob's lair. So how are they getting in? How are they getting over the mountains? All of this is just completely bypassed, and the only reason that I'm bringing it up is even if you were like, oh, okay, well, it's possible maybe at speed that they'd make that distances. They might be able to make that distance at a stretch, a bit of a stretch of the imagination, and not in line with where Tolkien placed speeds and distances of people moving across Middle-earth, but okay. But then we've got the actual features of Mordor and how difficult it is to get in. So they would have needed to go all the way up to the top, most likely, to the Morannon, which is where the Black Gate is, which is where the Black Gate of Mordor. This top northwestern corner is kind of the main way in. It's the easiest way into the whole plateau that is Mordor. So they would have had to go up this whole side, get in, and then magically find the Southlanders that they come to save. And that's a point, going back to the Forbes article, that's made. Speaking of maps, here's the one that Amazon released to show the different Second Age. Yep, apparently a copy was not sent to the writer's room. In any case, Númenóreans arrived just in the nick of time to save Arondir, Bronwyn, and the peasant army from Adar and his orcs. They cross this enormous distance and find the exact location at the village that's being assaulted on the very morning of the battle, and quite literally moments before our heroes are killed by the bad guys. I mean, how did they know they were there? If you look at Mordor, Mordor's massive. Mordor's absolutely huge. And yeah, Galadriel and co immediately know exactly where to go. Despite the fact that at this time, before she actually arrives to fight off the orcs from killing Arondir, she only really has circumstantial evidence based on Halbrand's stories, based on what Halbrand says, that there is any actual orc activity going on here. I mean, that didn't stop her from mobilising the entire Númenórean army, or at least a big chunk of it, you would assume. But that aside, You know, how do they know that they were in this northwest section near Arodrin, near Mount Doom? It's not really explained. I actually think that could have been explained. It would have been a push, but they could have had Galadriel, all right, cover this distance fairly quickly. Is it believable? No. I mean, we haven't even really touched the the sailing of the ship from Numenor to this area, but we're going to just put that one aside. We could have had Galadriel look off into the distance. It's already been established in the story that she has exceptional vision. She's got exceptional sight. She could have, in some way, climbed to maybe a watchtower in the southwestern area of Mordor, or the Southlands, seen way off in the distance that there was some torches, maybe the tower falling over when Arondir brings the tower over. Could have seen that there were torches and said, there is some sort of attack going on here. We need to get going. We need to kick our asses into gear, and taken a few riders with her to move at speed in order to intercept them in time. That could have also been an opportunity for Isildur to step up, because it had already been established that he's got some sort of connection with his horse. She might recognise that his horse is the fastest and he wants to go with the horse, and that could have been a way of taking Isildur with her as one of the quick riders. Obviously, the idea of 500 people making that journey is even more ludicrous, so she would have had to take a small number, only the fastest, and that could have been a way for Isildur to step up and say, I'll come with you, and you know, this connection with his horse, he could say, I'm a good rider. I mean, and then that would be a little bit of foreshadowing with him being made a stable hand, you know, for him being put into the stables to look after the horses. Would that have completely patched over the plot issue of travelling that distance? No. But at least it would have been an acknowledgement. It would have been something to hand over a little bit of believability, but it just wasn't there. The problem is with undermining distances as well, is it undermines people's choices, because later on in the plot, it stops mattering where people are and the choices that they make to be in certain areas if they can cross massive amounts of land in a day or day or two. It just beggars belief. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know if you also saw the shadow of the later seasons of the Game of Thrones while you were watching this episode of Rings of Power, because I certainly did. As soon as I saw Galadriel arrive, I just thought, they've done it again.